Namaste, good afternoon, and a very happy Eid to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I, Nitika Mendirata, on behalf of SASR India, welcome all of you to the online symposium on Right to Education Act and National Education Policy 2020. Brings me great joy and honor to introduce our resource person for today, Mrs.Aloka Guha, ma'am. With over 4 decades of experience in the field of disability rehab, ma'am was the founder chairperson of the National Trust, which is a statutory body of Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. She has served as the technical officer for the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Unit of WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office, and also has numerous projects of UNICEF and ILO to her credit. And she's also worked with the World Bank on a project for inclusive education. She is an expert in various committees of Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment, RCI, MHRD, National Trust, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Culture, NCRT, CBSE, and much more. And having had the privilege and honor of working with ma'am on a few projects, I know how extensively she is involved in writing books and manuals specifically on inclusive education. And she was also the chairperson of Task Force on Inclusive Education of Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. Ma'am, I once again welcome you and thank you for gracing this symposium and giving us your time despite your busy schedule. I now hand over the session to you, ma'am, for sharing your insights on the topic today.
So, good morning, everybody, and Eid Mubarak. Sabko hamare taraf se hello. How are you? I hope you're staying home and staying safe. She's one of my favorite co-members. Whenever I'm asked for, if I'm chairing a meeting, if I'm asked for who else do I want on my committee, I will promptly say I want Nitika. So thank you for all that you do, Nitika, and God bless. So I'm going to talk today about the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009. Although in short, we normally address this as RTE. Actually, the full name, and if you Google RTE, you won't get it. You will get Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education, RCFCE 2009. It became operational in 2010. I'm also going to be talking about NEP. And for both of these, I'm looking at the perspectives of special needs education, not just the full act, but all of those aspects which clearly are meant for children with disabilities. So my first request to all of you is that please don't use the word normal. And this word has RTE and NEP. One of the bad side of it is that so many children with disabilities have come into the mainstream schooling system that teachers, in trying to differentiate between CWSN and those without disabilities, usually use the word normal for children who are actually typical children, regular children. And that's like you are immediately assuming that those who are not normal are abnormal or subnormal, which is a horrible word to use. So please use the words typical and atypical. Here's this mother who says, both of my children are normal. One is autistic, the other is not autistic. So it hurts people when you say, ye normal hai, ye normal nahi hai. So the other point I want to make with this slide is that persons with disabilities are rights holders. Inke paas adhikar hai. Or governments are duty bearers. It is their duty to ensure that children with disabilities and every other child, their rights are realized. And isme you and I, those of you who are teachers or to be teachers, realize, you must realize that it is your duty. It is your bounden duty to know all of the laws and all of the rights that flow from those laws that are meant for the children that you work with. Now, supposing I ask you, Nitika, I don't see anyone else, so I'm going to ask you. Nitika, supposing you lost a gold chain, okay? What would you do?
First, look for it. Try to look for it at nearby places where it might be. Then take help from others around me to help me look for it. And then probably later on lodge a complaint.
Right. You would go to the police station and say, I've lost my gold chain. So supposing that police person who is on duty at that time refuses to file an FIR, आप क्या करोगे?
उनको रिक्वेस्ट करेंगे, बताएंगे हमारा अधिकार है, प्लीज कंप्लेंट करिए, लिखिए.
Okay. And so at that time, supposing you knew exactly which law protects your right to file an FIR, which law, which section of which law, would that help?
Most certainly, it will be help me. It will certainly help me in attaining that right and exercising that right of mine. Yes.
Exactly. So all of those rights that we fight for the children that we serve, अगर कोई स्कूल में जाके the principal says मुझे नहीं लेना है ये बच्चे को आप लेके चले जाओ, if at that time we know exactly which section of which law we can quote without threatening anybody. I'm not saying कि सबके साथ आप झगड़ा करो, नहीं. Persuade karo, yes. If that doesn't work, if you quote a particular law and section, subsection from it, in which the child has to be admitted, where you cannot deny admission, then that is what helps us teachers. So this is why I enjoy teaching educational laws, education related rights, because this is how we can win the battle for so many of the children who cannot always fight for their rights. And even sometimes their parents themselves are not knowledgeable or are not aware that the child has a right, has equal right to education like every other child. So let me move on. This is the rights-based framework in India for children with disabilities. There's RCI Act 1992. There was the PWD Act, which has now got repealed, and we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, and we have the National Trust Act 1999. Other than that, these are disability-specific laws. Two other I want to quote. One is RTE, which I'm going to talk about, 2009 amendments, 2012. And NEP, which is not a law, but which is a vision of the government of India, and we need to know about it. So aaj ke din, I'll only be talking about these two, the RTE Act and the NEP Act, which is in the white box, because those are two efforts made by government of India to include children with disability. As a child, they need to know that they have a right to education. Saman adhikar, equal. As teachers, it is our responsibility to ensure the realization of that right. जब तक ना आप law पढ़ोगे, law से rights आता है. Our education rights come both from our RPWD Act as well as the Education Related Act. हमारा उनके अधिकार को उन तक पहुंचाने के लिए ये हमारा दायित्व है. Please remember that it is our bounden duty. And also, the right to education of all children is now a fundamental right through the 86th Amendment to the Constitution in 2002. Uske baad, only after education became a fundamental right, then we started to develop and do a draft of the RTE Act. It took 10 years, finally came through. So it is our right to fight for the rights of children with disability. So let me come to this slide, which is largely an outline. Chapter 1 is on sections 1 and 2, which gives the definitions of what is what. Chapter 2, sections 3 to 5 is right to free and compulsory education. What does free mean? What does compulsory mean? And chapter 3, section 6 to 11, it's on the duties of the appropriate governments. Why appropriate government? Because Education is on the concurrent list. इसमें केंद्रीय सरकार का भी काम है, ड्यूटी है, राज्य सरकार का भी ड्यूटी है, और लोकल पंचायत वगैरह, लोकल गवर्नमेंट का भी 3 levels of duty bearers in the right to education. Chapter 5 is on, Chapter 4 is on section 12 to 28, responsibilities of schools. This is the largest chapter in the Right to Education Act, and it very clearly delineates what the schools can do, what teachers can do, and what teachers cannot do. Then chapter 5 is on curriculum and completion of elementary education, which is the very purpose of the RTE Act, to bring back a large number of children who are out of school, bring them back and give them free and compulsory education. Chapter 6 is on section 31 to 34. It's about protection of the rights. If those rights are not respected, where do we go to fight for that right? Now, tell me one thing. When I'm talking about chapter 2, right to free and compulsory education, please write in the chat box and Nitika will read it out to me. What does free mean? And what does compulsory mean? So while you write in the chat box, I'm going to go to chapter 1, where in section 2D, and that's very important for you to remember, RTE में chapter 1, section 2, subsection D says, child belonging to disadvantaged group, in brackets, means a child with a disability or a child belonging to the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, the socially and educationally backward class, or such other group having disadvantage owing to social, cultural, economical, geographical, linguistic, gender, or such other factor as may be specified by the appropriate government by notification in the Gazette. And E, child belonging to weaker section, meaning a child belonging to such parent or guardian whose annual income is lower than the minimum limit. Now, this is 2 things here. One is disadvantaged and one is weaker. As you know, in our constitution, there is no specific mention of disability, but they come under the weaker section or the disadvantage. Disadvantage means socially disadvantaged, and weaker means economically weaker. So look at the difference. Weaker and disadvantage ek nahi hai, do alag hai. Disadvantage means because of caste, because of very rural areas, or because of a gender, or because of disability, you have a social disadvantage. Whereas when your parents' income is very low, then you are a economically weaker section. So these 2 are specified, and in the original RTE Act, there was no mention of disability because they didn't want to include children with disability. And we fought hard for about 2 years. And finally, in the 3rd year, that very quickly, normally you don't get amendments that quickly, but within 3 years, that is in 2012, the amendments came through, which included children with disability in chapter 1, section 2, subsection D. So that mention, please remember, I've highlighted in yellow, wahan pe disadvantaged group ke andar disabilities came in through an amendment. Now, have you got anything in the chat box, Nitika?
Yes, ma'am. One of the participants mentions that compulsory means it is mandatory to educate every child with or without disability. Free means no cost involved. Till age of 14 years, they're guessing. And right to free means liberty of expression, speech, and practice. Free means no expenditure on part of child. Compulsory means government's responsibility to see that all children are enrolled.
Excellent, excellent. This is exactly what I wanted to hear. Free means not only free from fees, but everything else that may prevent the parent from sending the child to school. That includes clothes, that includes books, that includes a free meal, your midday meal. So, and the compulsory onus is on the government, not on the parent, or there is a mention in section 10 about parent, but the onus is on governments to go and look for children who are not in school, find them, bring them back to school. Compulsory on governments and free from all expenses that may prevent the parent from sending the child to school. So I have chapter 2, section 3, which says disabled children, RTE Act mein aayega. Or section 4, right to admission in age appropriate class. This is important for us because हमारे पास बहुत सारे बच्चे हैं, disabled बच्चे हैं जो कभी school नहीं गए. Their parents may not have gone to school, but you have to put them in age appropriate, not ability appropriate. Means 10 साल का बच्चा है जो वो class 4 में minimum आएगा, मगर वो तो कभी school गए नहीं. So what to do? So there was a lot of discussion. Remember, RTE took 10 years to come through. Lot of discussion, and then they put in that that child who is not ability appropriate but is age appropriate will have a right to special training. And that is mentioned 3-4 times, as I will explain later, that a child who does not have the necessary academic wherewithal to fit into that class has the right, ye adhikar hai, to special training so that he or she comes to at par with other children. So special training is a right, and all special educators should know that. Then I come to chapter 3, section 8A, right to admission, attendance and completion of EE. मगर हम क्या देखते हैं, पहले 10 साल से तो बच्चे को आज भी है कई जगह में कि they don't get admission, but they have a right to admission. So remember section 8A subsection 2, जहाँ wherever you face a principal or a school which says नहीं देंगे हम disabled बच्चे को admission, please quote section 8A subsection 2. They have a right to admission, attendance and completion of elementary education. That's 0 to 14, but that got extended from RTE Act to 18. Right to infrastructure, which includes buildings, accessible buildings, teachers, and learning equipment. Right to special training facility. So this is the second time in section 8E, right to special training is mentioned. And then right to monitored admission. Monitored means monitored by the SMC. Then right to train teachers. And then section 10 is a duty of parents to send their children to school. So इसके बारे में बहुत चर्चा हुआ था कि भाई should we penalize the parents? How do we get the children to school? क्या हम parents को penalize करेंगे बच्चे को नहीं भेजने के लिए? So then ultimately, so there will be more parents in jail than children in school. So that was left as a persuasive element कि parents need to send their wards, their children to school. Then I have section 12C, which says at least 25% of the incoming class should have children from weaker and disadvantaged groups, which includes children with disability. Section 13, no capitation fee, no screening procedures. Section 14, no denial of admission on the basis of age proof. कि नहीं इस बच्चे को birth certificate नहीं है हम इसको नहीं भर्ती करेंगे. That is not allowed. Every child has to be given admission. Section 15, no denial of admission. Section 16, and no holding back. इसके बारे में you may have different views, I may have different views, and this has been changed a little bit. Some some states allow no holding back only till class 5. After that, there are regular tests. But ये important है for us to know कि section 17, prohibition of physical and mental abuse. पहले तो we had a law which said teachers can't physically hit the child. This RTE includes prohibition and prevention of both physical and mental abuse. So chapter 4, I want to continue. 21.1, right to representation of parents, guardians of disadvantaged weaker section in school management committee. इसका मतलब क्या है? School management committee was a very innovative thought where you put a large percentage of parents and guardians in the school management committee, which took away that principal and teachers का जो monopoly था कि we will decide everything about the school. When the school management committee was formed, they said 75% should be guardians. And of that, there should be at least one representative or to be in the SMC. That's an important right. Then section 24, subsection 1D, right to assessment of learning abilities and subsequent provision of supplementary instruction if and when required. So इसको भी आप नोट कीजिए, section 24 subsection 1D, हर बच्चे का अधिकार है कि उनके जो learning abilities है उसकी assessment हो and consequently उनके supplementary instructions अगर लगेगा उसका भी अधिकार है. The child has a right to special training and supplementary instruction if and as required. Same section 24, let me continue two more. One is subsection 1E, right of parents. ये ठीक से समझिए. Right of parents to meetings with teachers and information about their child's attendance, learning abilities and progress, etc. So ये parent का अधिकार है. ये आप सब parent को समझाएं कि section 24 subsection 1E ये नहीं है कि teacher आपके ऊपर दया कर रही है कि आप जब उनका खुशी हो मिले ना मिले. The parent has a right to meet with teachers and to find out how their child is doing, progressing, not only socially, but also academically. Are they attending? What are their learning abilities? Are they not learning? If they're not learning, why they're not learning? So this is a parent right, and I want you to make a note of this. Section 24, in fact, almost all of it is very important. Then I have section 24, subsection 2, disciplinary action against teachers for committing default of the above. अगर वो parents के साथ meet ना करे, अगर वो assessment ना करे, अगर supplementary instruction if required and if asked for is not given, then please remember that it can be recommended that there is disciplinary action taken against the teacher. ये सब जानकारी अगर आपके पास रहे, मैं नहीं कह रही कि आप जाके स्कूल के साथ झगड़ा करें, but स्कूल को आप you let them know that you know कि आपके बच्चे के या आपके स्टूडेंट के ये अधिकार है और अधिकार का उल्लंघन होने से बहुत सारे measures RTE में है. इसको हम कैसे सुधरे. Then I go to section 29, curriculum and evaluation. It's very much, even in the NEP, all-round development, build a child's knowledge and talent, physical and mental learning to the fullest extent possible. And then I want you to look at G, 29G, making the child free of fear and trauma, and allowing the child to express views freely. Ye aapke one of your participants mentioned this. This is actually a very important right. And NEP adds to this by saying कि कहीं पे स्कूल में एक window, एक जगह बनाए आप जहाँ पे quietly a parent or a student can anonymously put in a complaint against a teacher for not behaving properly, for not addressing learning needs, for any obstruction of rights. So I finished 29 and I go to 31. 31 is monitoring of the child's right to education. ये बहुत important है. पहले 5-6 साल में there was a REPA, Right to Education Act, Right to Education P Act, Protection Act, where if there was abuse of that right, or if the child didn't get the right, then you could go and complain to that particular body. That has now been repealed. And now we have the National Commission for the Protection of Child Rights, right? Or the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. Ye NCPCR national level mein and state level mein SCPCR, which is under 17, section 17, is a provision that educational rights, if not addressed, can be taken up by the State Commission or the National Commission for the Protection of Child Rights, because a child has a right to education. So it comes under the National Commission and the State Commission. They have also the right to take up matters suo motu. They may read a newspaper, they may hear a complaint indirectly, and then they can take up the case and look at, they have quasi-judicial powers, just as our Chief Commissioner and State Commissioner of Disabilities do. They can probe under Section 15 and 24. Please remember, under Section 15 and Section 24 of the Commission for Protection of Children's Rights, they can probe difficulties that children have with educational rights. So the redressal of grievances, this is Section 32, that they have local jurisdiction also. So please remember these parts, Section 31 and 32, National Commission for Child Rights, State Commission for Child Rights, and Section 15 and 24 of NCPCR, where they can and they have to listen to complaints and take action within 3 months. And they can do that on their own after reading a newspaper or an article or anything. So if the local authority is aggrieved by that decision, they also have other powers. Now, model rules, as you know, every act has 3 aspects. The first is the act itself, which is passed by Parliament. The second are the rules, which are framed by the concerned ministry. For example, Right to Education Act rules are framed by Ministry of Education, whereas right of disability, right of persons with disability is the rules are framed by Ministry of Social Justice. That's it. Now the central, because these are all on the concurrent list, the center provides a set of rules which are then adopted by different states, and sometimes the concept of local authority differs from state to state. Sometimes they give lots of importance to migrant children, because those are areas where there is, say for Chhattisgarh, tribal areas, Madhya Pradesh, migrant labor. So they move from one state to the other, but the children continue to stay in the state, and you have to provide hostel facilities. So model rules, the law, the rules, and the third is the regulation. Now, let me just tell you about the National Trust Act, of which I was the first chairman. The Ministry of Social Justice made the act. That was another, it took 11 years. The Ministry of Social Justice made the rules, but the regulations were made by the board of the National Trust. So yeah, kya karte hai? The act is usually something very broad that has to last for 10, 20, 30 years. Please remember, the Indian Lunacy Act of 2012 lasted till the Mental Health Act of 1987. So laws को change करना मुश्किल होता है और बहुत time लगता. इसलिए, supposing they say the National Trust Act will this is a broad act, then the rules will say what should the chairperson's qualifications be, what should the joint secretary, chief executive officer's qualifications be, what will be their salaries, then the regulations will be even more minute, because the regulations are made by the board or by the commission itself, and they can in-house change that. Rules can also be changed, regulations can also be changed by the ministry, and then they can lay it in the House of Parliament for 30 days, and then you consider it passed. So it gets more and more fine, more and more detailed: law, rules, regulations. So for example, National Trust has all three, but RCI has only the act and the regulations, no rules. Whereas RPWD Act has act and rules, which are already notified by 31 states. So let me come to the model rules. I'm talking again about special training needs and preparation of appropriate TLM. So who will teach, give that special training? The classroom teacher. And where will it be? It will be in schools or in safe residential schools. And resource teacher or classroom teacher will provide the special training. Kitne din ke liye? The law says minimum 3 months, not exceeding 2 years. And after that, there is still going to be monitoring by the teacher of those children who came through special training, and they will continue to get special attention from the teacher until that child catches up fully. Then section 7, there are transport arrangements for CWS, particularly those with mental and intellectual disabilities. They are entitled to escorts. Then section 8, ensuring that access is not hindered because of social or cultural factors, and free special learning, support material, etc. Non-discrimination. This non-discrimination, it comes under the model rules, and no labeling of the child. So RTE amendment, as I said earlier, came in 2012. They included disadvantaged group under section 2D of the RTE Act. And that includes children at that time in the PWD Act and the National Trust Act as well. So obviously that includes, that act is repealed, and also children with multiple disabilities or severe disabilities have a right to home-based education. Iske baare mein bahut ladai hui, because we felt, some of us felt, that teachers will use this home-based as an exit clause. Class mein nahi rakhna hai, isko main kaise padhaun, isko home-based education mein bhej do. So large number of children kept being sent to home-based. But then the ministry came down hard on this home-based aspect, and now the NEP says home-based education will have a very detailed culture and SOPs, that's standard operating procedures, and they will be monitored more strictly. But to give them their credit, a lot of the children from home-based education actually did transit to the resource room and ultimately to the school. Not all, but a large number. So RTE, this is a snapshot that I've got the main rights here, and you need to remember these. RTE guarantees to learners with disabilities under section 2D, free compulsory education in neighborhood schools, section 3. Section 4, 8, and 9, special training to bring them at par. Section 7, non-discrimination on any ground. Then 17, where mental and physical health both should be free from trauma. 21, inclusion in the SMC of the parent with disability. 24, there's 1DE, assessment, learning abilities, learning progress, and the meeting with the teachers. And 29, 2D and G, free from trauma, free from ability to express their, so this is, and also HPE. So these are the educational rights in a snapshot of children with disabilities under RTE. So now I go to the National Education Policy. Right? So you have 2 years plus an early basis of 3 years, 3 into 5 years, then class The second one will be classes 3 to 5 for ages 8 to 11. And then there will be, the first one is called foundational for 3 years to 8 years old, classes 1 and 2, plus 3 years of early childhood. Preparatory 8 to 10, classes 3, 4, and 5, where light textbooks will be introduced and education will be more formal, and you lay the groundwork across subjects for the middle school. So middle school, there will be, for those who are 11 to 14 years old, there will be class 6, 7, and 8. And there you will be introduced to more heavy subject and the connections between the subjects. For example, if you teach in regular school, you will know that disaster, it comes both under environmental science and science. So in one, you teach different types of disaster, natural disaster, man-made disaster. And then in another, you teach how to deal with that disaster and why that disaster scientifically happens. So these connections between subjects and between grades, that is very important, not only for you, teachers and special educators, but also for the students to know. So that's where subject teaching is introduced, and you'll get a new set of teachers. And then there's secondary for 14 to 18 years, classes 9, 10, 11, and 12, where it'll be now multidisciplinary teaching. You can actually switch from science, one subject, to commerce, one subject, arts, one subject. So you can take physics along with accountancy, along with history. So you have this choice. I wish we had these kind of choices when we were growing up. We would have had a different learning trajectory. So they're now allowing under the NEP that the student can choose in which subject he wants to be examined. So everything changes. It's much more progressive, much more inclusive, and much more equitable. So I'm talking now about your ECC foundational years, 3 to 6 years. So NCERT will now do a national curriculum framework for early childhood education. This will be in 2 sub-frames. 0 to 3 will be for parents, home-based training, and 3 to 6 for schools. And this is very important because many schools actually have early childhood centers, but there is no SOP, standard SOP for conducting these. So everybody is doing what they want, what they think is appropriate, and they do a good job, I'm sure. But in chapter 1, they say that school ke tayari ke liye ye bahut important, the early childhood part. And we know that our children with disabilities will really benefit from the ECC. Why? Because there's a lot of activity-based learning. There's play. Now, when one child plays with another, he's not wasting his time. That is when the maximum brain development takes place. Maximum. The neurons quickly, they develop and they grow and they multiply. So child-to-child play is the best way for the child's brain to develop. And there's numeracy, literacy, communication, early language. Most importantly, they're teaching behavior. And a lot of our children with intellectual disabilities, children with autism, and many other children will benefit from that early behavioral instruction. So there's a school preparedness, something we fought for so long. I'm sure Nitika will agree with me. Children with disabilities come into class 1 without school preparedness. So this will make a huge change. Very large number of children will now be able to enter class 1 school ready. They're ready for school because they've had these 3 years behind them. So they will be used as Samajik Kendra Chetna centers. So I shift to chapter 4. Have I shifted? Yes. So no, I'm left out one part is chapter 2 and 3. They're very important for learning Hindi, learning your mother tongue, and for bringing out of school children back to school. So that is a very important part of NEP, was an important part of RTE, and a huge amount of progress has been made. But there's still about 5 million children out of school still. So NEP brings those aspect back and says, school should be such a good learning center that children will not want to leave. And parents will also want to send their children to government schools. उसको इतना अच्छा बनाओ कि वो private school में न जाए. I shift quickly to chapter 4 because I'm running out of time. Chapter 4 is on curriculum and pedagogy. This here is the largest chapter in the NEP. And as I said, you have subject switching. You choose your own learning trajectory. जहाँ पे आपके interest है, आप वो choose करो. This is in the higher classes, of course. And you will have clubs and camps and subject streams. And very important for us, vocational training from the local trades. Every child should have good grounding in at least 2 vocations and be exposed to many more. And this should be from the local trades that are there. So NCRT will develop National Curriculum Framework for School Education, all again. So we'll have a new curriculum framework. And in this time, NEP says, the Ministry of Social Justice, Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities, and the NIs, National Institutes, will be involved in developing all of these national curriculum frameworks. Remember, there will be a national curriculum framework for teacher education as well. So I come to chapter 6 and chapter 14. These two are specifically on inclusive and equitable learning. And in this, there's a group called SEDG. Let me link this with RTE. SEDG is socially and economically disadvantaged group. SEDG. Same as in RTE. Same as in our constitution also. So which are these groups that are under SEDG? In chapter 6, which is on school education, chapter 14 on higher education, SEDG include socio-culturally excluded groups, including minority, SC, ST, etc. Gender, disabilities, and number 4, those who are geographically very rural, very remote, and the NEP calls them aspirational districts. So there will be very targeted opportunities for these 4 groups of children to enter the system and excel in it, not only in school education, but higher education as well. So currently, as you know, we have 4 options for education of children with special needs. One is the special schools, one is the home-based education, one is neighborhood school, and NIOS. Now, all 4 systems will have found mention in the NEP, and all of these will be included, and I want to tell you how in 1 or 2 slides. Please remember, special educators are mentioned. In the NEP section 5.21, chapter 5 is on teachers. 5.21 says there is an urgent need for additional special educators for certain groups of school children, like children with disability, sometimes calling them Divyangjan, sometimes calling them differently abled, usually children with special needs. So NEP mein likha hai, and saying especially at the middle and secondary school level, specific learning disabilities. This is the only disability that's mentioned by name, SLD. And now SLD is included under RTE Act under intellectual. So special educators are needed for subject teaching, as well as for knowing what the impact of the disability is on learning. So there will be changes needed in the curriculum, in the pedagogy, and in the universal curriculum design. Is there a special school mentioned in the NEP? Actually, not in those words, but in 6.15, NEP talks about the role of special schools, but calls them alternative forms of school. 6.15. क्या करेंगे उसमें? उसमें कह रहा है कि they can continue with their earlier pedagogies, but if they want their children to have the same opportunities as other children, then MOE will support them, give them financial assistance for 2 things. One is building the capacity of the teachers in inclusive pedagogies, in learning levels, etc. Also, they will give money in for setting up labs and libraries. But most importantly, they mentioned that they have found that children from special schools rarely, very rarely reach higher education. And the goal of NEP, one of the major goals, is to include the enhance the GER in higher education. So they will support children from special schools who are particularly meritorious to reach higher education. And here are the specifics. Chapter 6.2.5, that most of the chapter is about all the SEDGs, all four, but 6.2.5 is specifically on disability. And that includes 6.4, where, mind you, they say very clearly that the entire school education part of RTE Act is fully accepted by the NEP. Other than that, at 6.4, they say they'll give you scholarships, cash transfers to incentivize parents, 6.5, one-on-one teaching, peer tutoring, infrastructure building, teacher education, 6.7 is for girls, and 6.13 and 14 is on SLD. And they are saying that a body will be developed called PARAK, PARAKH, performance assessment, etc., which will develop tools and guidelines for teaching children with SLD. Other than that, in 6.11, they say school complexes where middle school and higher education centers, along with Balwadis, will be all in one geographical space. So that's very good for our children, because the entire complex will have a barrier-free environment. They'll have technology enhanced, including Braille, large print, ISL, assistive devices, etc. So this will help our children very much in terms of the fear that they sometimes have of transitioning from middle school to high school. So there are many enabling mechanisms mentioned. And with benchmark disabilities, they say that 6.12 and high support needs in 6.13, 6.11, their education for all is the responsibility of the state. This is a wonderful statement, and please remember that. And they will also assist children, parents and guardians in home-based learning. They're going to develop guidelines, and those guidelines will be monitored. High support needs के लिए resource centers, they want more and more cross-disability training for special educators, particularly for resource centers where all types of children with disabilities come. So technologically enabled processes for CWSN is mentioned more than once, because ICT is a huge part of the NEP, not only for teacher training, but for teachers keeping tags on the performance of the students, on learning initiatives, learning levels. The whole NEP is based on the fact that the outcome, the learning outcomes, or the LOs that we see today are not acceptable. So they want to enhance the learning outcomes from what they are now to what they should be. And these are all of these methods, including teacher training, technology, are all methods to improve the learning outcomes of children. So along with general teachers, there's going to be pre-service and in-service in inclusive education as well. And this is very good. It's like music to our ears that they will be given certificate courses, general teachers, to improve their skills in inclusive education. And the regular BEd will have a much larger component of inclusive education than it does now. So there was only one gap that I want to talk about before I finish, that RTE Act and RTE Act had different levels of schools. RTE had special schools and neighborhood schools, and RTE had home-based and neighborhood schools. So there was a gap in between, and NEP has included all three in its fold. Reasonable accommodation, I mentioned to you last time when I was talking about autism, and it's mentioned 5 times in the RTE Act. Please note down these. What is reasonable accommodation? कि हर बच्चे की अलग need है in learning. So learning ho ya employment ho, every child has specific needs, and making those accommodations is the child's right. ये भी अधिकार है. So RPWD Act में 2, 3, 5, 12, 3 ये सब बार बार mentioned है कि reasonable accommodation एक अधिकार है. Accessibility is a group right, but reasonable accommodation for a child with disability is an individual right. इसको ना भूलें. So this is the role of the teacher that's going to change enormously. The special teachers, the special educators, resource teachers, they have to learn the NEP, they have to be familiar with pedagogies that they didn't know earlier. They have to be familiar with curriculum adaptations and technology and guidelines for vocational training, as well as for early childhood education. And the synergies between the three acts, I'm quickly going through that. Every child has a right to a trained teacher. Every child has a right to a pedagogically capable teacher. Please remember that. RPD Act में है, RTE में है, NEP में है. Capacity building is part of all of these three acts and policies, and the integration of academics with arts and culture. These targeted measures, not only for the child, but for the parents, and most important is to provide inclusive education. All three mention that. And I'm hoping that RPWD Act and NEP will be a game changer. Why? Because both of them use a social model of disability, where the fault, the defect is not with the child, but with the system. So both these, RPD Act and NEP, mentions that the systemic transformation has to take place. The onus for inclusion and enhancement and equity and inclusion is on the government and the systems, not on the child. So this is the journey of inclusive education. And I've taken some of these pictures myself, where we, as you can see, earlier they would sit on the floor. Some places they still do, but many places the child has found a uniform like everybody else, has a chair. The child is asked to come to the blackboard and write. And the blackboard has been lowered. So this is a picture of all three are picture. No, the first and third are from Tamil Nadu. The second one is from Arunachal. And the last picture I show where the teacher herself comes in a wheelchair. So the journey of inclusive education continues. Game on. And all the best to all of you for listening to me so patiently. Thank you.
Thank you so
Nitika, over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for not just helping us understand the RTE and NEP better, but also giving us, helping us understand how the entire legal mechanism works, how it moves from the act to policies and the rules. So thank you very much for that. Now we'll take a few questions if you permit, ma'am.
Sure.
So one is, maybe probably it's just a concern of special education teachers now that, although you have mentioned about, chapter 5 having a mention of special education teachers, but I think a few of them want to know what is the future specifically for, since regular education teachers will be trained on special education component, what's the future for special education teachers? Would NCT be training their teachers, and what will happen to RCI accredited professionals is one of the concerns they want to address.
Yes, actually, someone has mentioned that it's a novel, that they want to know about this, and I'm happy to answer that. I think I mentioned this, that the NEP specifically says we need more and more and more resource teachers and special educators. There are some states in which there is less demand, or demand for teachers with special needs training has not been encouraged. But in most parts of the country, we are looking at an increased need. And as in Delhi and Gujarat and probably Tamil Nadu, every regular school must have a special educator. Sometimes it's more than 1, 2, or 3, and we see that even in Kolkata. So the need for special educators is never going to come down, because you spend 2 years learning about that particular disability. And RCI, Nitika, you will remember that conference that we had in Guwahati, where RCI looked at the NEP and collectively with 100 experts took decisions on how to go forward and change what further training is needed. So where RCI along with NCTE, that's part of the actually 2020 NEP guidelines that RCI has to work very closely with NCTE, whereas there will be certificate courses developed for special educators. They cannot match the 2 years of training that you have had specifically in a disability. But the going forward, my friends, is also that you develop more expertise on cross disability. And you need to know the NEP well, you need to know the RTE Act well, you need to know the RTE Act and every other act, but you also need to do your CREs, is that enhances your knowledge and your skills. But RCI is also looking at developing short courses on SLD, short courses on inclusive education, short courses on cross disability. So these are initiatives that have been taken on board by RCI, approved by their General Council and Executive Council. And because of the pandemic, many things have gotten delayed. But believe me, you will never, there will never be a time when we won't need special educators.
Now, I have one personal question, ma'am, that I would want you to, throw some light on. Now that, there's talks about compulsory 4-year, BEd integrated programs for teacher training. So, and in our country, there are many NGOs running and offering teacher training in special education. So what do you see, what is their future?
That's a very good question, which I'm not able to answer because that's a policy decision, which will have to be taken by the ministry. And you know as well as I do that those decisions have been delayed because of the pandemic. And but RCI MPhil courses will continue to run, although the NEP mentions that there will be no MPhil courses. In terms of the BEd and the DEd, RCI is already looking at convergence of certain courses, but they will always continue to run as far as the disability sector is concerned. My understanding is that special education courses will be run. And there are some courses which are not that much in need, and the highest number of courses run by RCI is on mental retardation or intellectual disabilities. But there are some which have outlived their utility. So there is an effort to converge certain courses and bring together a more meaningful, so that it becomes more cross disability. We've had some very fiery meetings on that. And but I think a more realistic decision is en route, is on its way. But Nitika, I think you will continue to run your courses and your centers for a long time now.
Let me quickly check if we have any, if we have left any.
Somebody asked me about Rubenstein, Florentine. In terms of early childhood education, the person talked about the impact on parents, impact on the child, and impact on the system for including a child who is already school ready. Now, why do we have so many children dropping out at this point, children with special needs? Because they couldn't cope with the academics, number one. The school and the teacher were not ready to teach them. Parents also were not ready to send them regularly. So if we invest so much on early childhood education, then the child is school ready, teachers are ready to include them, and most importantly, the school and the system is ready to include them. That's what I mentioned in terms of style.
Right, I think, ma'am, you've addressed all the queries, and I now must.
Ma'am,
yes, please.
Yes, ma'am, I have seen the mention of Ruben Furestin in your slide.
Right.
Yeah, ma'am, I just wanted a little clarification on that. I think I missed listening to what exactly do you mean by putting his name there?
Yes, he talked about school readiness. And as I explained, the school readiness involves 3 aspects: readiness of the child, readiness of the parent, and readiness of the school. which includes teachers. So this NEP actually addresses that concern where you have 3 years of preschool preparation. So the child enters class 1 ready to learn academics from class 1. So that was my, I explained this, you must have missed out.
Thank you so
So
much, ma'am.
you're very welcome, my dear. I'm happy to answer questions.
So I must thank you now for always being so kind to us and giving us your time despite the busy schedule. And thank you for such detailed elaboration on the RTE and NEP and giving us such great insights that I'm sure most of the special education teachers and general education teachers who've joined us today would be benefiting from, and eventually would help benefit our learners with special needs in the coming days. So thank you, ma'am, for your time, and thank you all the participants. Wish you all a very happy Eid once again. And we've left the feedback form in the chat box for you, and request you to please click on it and submit your feedback and receive your certificates through it. Thank you, ma'am. Namaste, everyone. Good day.
Namaste.